Hey and welcome back. In this lesson we're going to look at film grain or digital noise that we can add over everything to kind of just blend everything together nicely. Now if we zoom in and I'm just going to solo the footage layer so we just see the original footage, and if I play through this you'll see it's not really that noisy. There's definitely some noise here in the darker areas. You can see there's some noise going on in these areas, so we want to match our CG objects to have the same kind of noise as our footage. So obviously if we now play this back and we look at some of these CG objects, let's look at this thing, and if we play some frames back you'll see that it doesn't have any noise. Let me just render this section here. So if I kind of scrub over this you'll see noise around it, but you won't see a lot of noise on the thing itself, or it will have a little bit of a different noise, and we want to try and match the noise to our footage. Now there's a few different ways you can do this. So on the combined layer, if I just solo that, this is where we can add our noise. So what we can do is we can add an effect. It's called match noise. Let me just see where we find this. Here we go. So it's called match grain under the noise and grain. So I'm just going to add it using FX console. So simply type match grain, and now we can say what layer it's going to reference to get the noise information from. So where it says noise source layer, just select the footage from that drop down, and then you can change this viewing mode to final output to not just be in that little preview box. And now if we play this back, if I just play a few frames, you will see that we've got some noise on this as well now. So if I toggle this on and off, you can definitely see a lot of noise on these barrels. If I maybe just zoom in here a bit more, and if I toggle that on and off. Now usually this match kinda works, but you still need to tweak some of the settings here, and it's actually under tweaking. Right here you'll get intensity, size and softness. Usually the intensity is the only one you need to change. Sometimes you can play around with the size of the noise or the grain as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to unsolo this layer, and then we're going to try and match it as best to the footage. So I'm just going to play a little bit of this and see if the noise is too much. Here you can actually see the noise is definitely too much on the 3D objects. So I'm simply going to go to the intensity here. Let's bring it down to like 0.5. And if we scrub through this now, let me just render a few frames. Okay, now if we scrub over this, you can see it's got a bit of a... Let's just zoom out slightly. So you just want to try and match that intensity of the noise to the footage. I think we can maybe bring it down a little bit more. So I'm going to bring it down to about 0.3. So play with these values. If the noise looks a little bit too big or too blotchy, you can always bring the size of the noise down as well, but I think it works well with the current setting. So let's just zoom out here. Alright, so let's have a look at this in full screen, and maybe let's just play a little section and see if there's anything that jumps out a bit. So I think we need to just bring the brightness or the highlights of our zombie down slightly. Everything else looks pretty good. So let's quickly go in here and see how we can do that. So we can use a crypto matte to bring the brightness of the zombie down slightly. So I'm going to drag in the render right at the top, but underneath the color grade and also the black bars. And then let's add a crypto matte effect to that layer. So we only want to isolate the zombie, so I'm going to change this to matte only and just click, hold in shift and make sure we select all the parts of our zombie. So we've got that matte that we can use, and I'm just going to rename this layer to zombie matte, just like that. And then I can hide this layer because we're just going to use it as a matte. And then I'm going to bring in an adjustment layer. So I'm going to create a new adjustment layer. I'm going to place this under the color grade, and this I'm going to call zombie adjust. Alright, and we want to change the matte or the track matte on that layer to the zombie matte, and then we want to change this from alpha to a luma matte. Alright, so now we are ready to add our effects to this layer. So I'm going to bring in a exposure control, and now we can simply just adjust that zombie on its own. So if you look at our scene in full, if I make any adjustments there, it will only affect our zombie. So that's the cool thing about Cryptomats. So I want to bring this down slightly. So let's try -1. That's probably too much. Maybe -0.5. Now we can also just control the highlights. If I bring in an effect like levels, we can just do some, you can see there we're only adjusting the highlights, or we can only adjust the shadow values. Maybe the normal exposure will actually work fine. So I'm going to delete this levels, but you can use the levels effect to adjust just the highlights or just the shadow parts of a specific model. So I think if we bring this down, maybe, I don't want to play with that number. I want to bring this down maybe to 0.7. I think I'm quite happy with the exposure as this. Maybe let's do it -0.8, bring it down a touch, and I think that kind of works. She might be slightly too sharp as well, so we can add a blur effect to this as well. So let's add a camera lens blur. Now I can see we can blur her as well. So let's bring this down to like maybe 1. No, that's too much. 0.3. Yeah, I think that works. So you kind of just want to match the surrounding, maybe even slightly less, maybe 0.2. Just to have, yeah, just that little bit of blur. And let's just scrub through and see how that looks. Yeah, another thing that we can do, let's just zoom in there again. We can try adding a tint effect to this zombie adjust. So I'm just going to add a tint effect, and by default it's going to go black and white, and it's going to give you the amount. So let's bring the amount down to 0, and you can take this white value, bring it down to like a darker gray, and then increase this value as well. So now if you take it all the way up, it's going to map the white values to this gray value, and the black values you can also adjust if you want to change that. But yeah, now you can just play with this amount, and that will also bring down those highlights slightly. I just don't want to bring down the black values too much. So maybe let's just put this on 1% and then bring this up slightly to probably like 20%. Yeah, I think that works. So if I toggle this zombie adjust layer on and off, you can see that's the original before we started with this adjustment using that Cryptomat, and that's after. So you kind of just want to try and match the highlights to the surrounding scene, and obviously to your color grade as well. I think that looks pretty cool. Yeah, I think nothing jumps out at me. This electrical box is looking pretty cool. This table is looking nice in the shadows. These items are looking pretty cool. Yeah, everything is looking nice. Zombies looking cool. Shadows are looking nice. So play around with this and see what you can create. And I will see you in the next lesson.